Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the In the 11 podcast. I'm your host, Brendan Griffiths, and this is the show we bring on those from the world of football to show you what it takes to be in the 11 at the highest possible level. This week, we have another very special guest. Another agent is stepping into the podcast. Super grateful to have Kalkeren Kieran stepping into the 11 this week and sharing loads of insight from his career as a FIFA agent, representing players and helping them take the next step in their career as professional soccer players. And you can just hear in the conversation the passion that Cal has for the game, the passion that he has for the players that he works with, and building relationships with the players and families that he works with. And it's really an amazing episode where I learned a ton, and hopefully all of you out there can really gain some insight into the world of professional soccer, the world of being an agent in this crazy game, and the behind the scenes of getting opportunities, signing contracts, and remaining a pro. So I am so excited to share this conversation with you. Super grateful to Cal once again for taking the time to be able to come and enlighten us. And without further ado, let me kick it over to myself and Cal. Stepping into the 11 this week and joining us is Kalkeren Kieran, an agent currently with Quorum Sports. And I appreciate you so much, Cal, for coming on and sharing your time with us and sharing some of your expertise. I'm really looking forward to hearing kind of the world of an agent, and especially, what it's like doing it down under as someone who just was living in Australia recently. I'm definitely keen to hear what you have to say about the Australian market. So again, thank you for coming on and can't wait to dive into your story.
Brendan, thanks so much for having me on the podcast this week. Look, it's sunny down here in Australia at the moment, so no complaints in terms of the weather at the moment. But look, to give you a little bit of background, Brendan, I suppose of myself then, I started out hugely in the scouting world, and through the scouting industry is how I began. I began as an academy scout for Blackpool FC. And at the time, the club were in the English Championship, and this was before Brexit. And a lot of players could go across at 16 years old as first-year academy scholars. So we used to bring a lot of first-year academy scholars over at 16 on trial, and I would be involved in the scouting reports, the attending of matches. At that time, highlights reel weren't so big at the time, so there's a lot of scouting reports and a lot of trust in the team around you. And I did that for a season or two, and I really enjoyed that. And we had a couple of players over on trial that signed first-year scholarships and so forth. And at the time, the club were a Category 3 academy, 4 categories in England, and they were a Category 3. And then after that, I joined a team called FC Groningen in the Netherlands, and at the time, they were in the Eredivisie. And I did a little bit of first-team scouting and a little bit of U21 scouting for the academy setup as well. And I was covering the Irish and English markets for Groningen, and for Blackpool, I was covering the Irish market. And then I went into the agency world quite some time ago now. So it's been, but I initially began from a sort of a scouting perspective. Like that's where I got my enjoyment was from talent identification.
Yeah.
Hugely.
That role of a scout within a club, I know you just dove into some of the responsibilities kind of, but I guess what does the day-to-day look like for a scout within a club? I remember, I've spoken to scouts in the past, and a lot of them they're constantly in their car, right? They're going to evaluate a player or scout a team, scout an opposition, all of a sudden they're here, there, and everywhere all around the globe, especially when you found yourself as a scout. What was sort of your day-to-day like?
I think the scouting world's hugely changed now, where a lot of teams are using video analysis as scouts now, where probably 80 or 90% of scouting's done on a computer. And a lot of teams are using softwares like White Scout, VEO, Huddle, Instat, Performance Sports. There's a lot of tools online now where the games are being, the raw footage is placed online, and the teams are sort of watching the games online. And then from there, a final decision. A final decision would always be made in person in terms of getting in the car, attending the games. But those 6 or 7 90-minute games and the video analysis and the scouting reports are initially done online, and then if the head of recruitment makes a decision to fly a scout out there or attend the game, the bulk of the scouting's already done. It's almost, I dare to say so, that the team isn't catfished, shall we say? When they do arrive to see the player in the flesh, that the eye meets the eye test meets what they saw on the hard footage online. So I think the scouting world's changed hugely now, and it's so global as well, Brendan. I think soccer's become such a global sport now. With the online scouting, teams are recruiting from worldwide now from a global perspective.
Yeah. With that sort of globalization of the game and being able to have access to really the entire database of players, it seems, around the world, how much does video sort of, for a young up and coming player, right? How much video or how much weight does their video carry when it's in front of the eyes of a scout? I remember thinking of a coach that I had in Denmark, and he spoke about when he went to visit a club in the Netherlands and talked about how the scouting department was essentially like, they would watch, maybe the first 10, 15, 30 seconds of a video and then move on to the next player, because there was just that much sort of data and video to go through that they didn't really quite have enough time to spend 3 minutes watching every single player's highlight video or watching clips of all these players that have been compiled. So just, I don't know, what is the landscape like? I mean, how many videos are you even watching during a day when being a scout,
Sure. I suppose from the scout to agent perspective, from a personal experience, I cover a lot of the NCAA market from the college market perspective in America. There's over 200 plus D1 programs in the US at the moment. And, that's a market that I roll up my sleeves and I have to go to work with. You got to be super proactive in that market. And there is only 24 hours in a day. And so it can be very tricky when you're on Y Scout or ESPN Plus on a Tuesday or Wednesday evening, and suddenly you've got 10 or 15 D1 programs on at the same time. So, honestly, from a college perspective this year, I've seen about 170 to 180 D1 programs. And that's taken me, hundreds of games, hundreds of hours of footage. And that's 90 minutes. I'm pretty old fashioned in my scouting. That's 90 minutes of tape. And you're really just looking for something that catches the eye. If that's a goalkeeper who commands his box, a striker who has a physical presence, a winger who has a modern day qualities of athleticism and agility. But it's a tricky one, with the video scouting. You don't see everything, and physically you can't attend every single D1 program game. So players might, come across on the tape a little bit different than they are. If you might see something in the flesh that you wouldn't see on the tape. But yeah, for sure, like hours and hours a day on the computer watching tape, particularly through the fall season. I think from September to December, my routine was get up in the morning, log in the ESPN Plus or Y Scout, and just go to work with a pen and a notepad, watching footage of Duquesne, Wake Forest, Clemson's, Notre Dame's, Sacramento State's, and you're just looking for diamonds in the rough. And the talent identification is one part of the agency world in terms of scouting the player. And then the second part's the initial contact with the player, having that conversation, and then trying to recruit them to the company. That's almost like a phase two, shall we say? That's the harder part.
Yeah,
that's the harder part.
Yeah, and if we even take just a small step back before, because I'm definitely curious to ask you about that process as well of actually reaching out to the player and how those conversations go. But what sort of led you to make the transition from the scouting world to the actual representation and an agency world?
That's a good question. I was super frustrated in the scouting world, working for one team at a time. And so, if from a club perspective, if you're a specific club scout, you're looking for a right back. You've got target positions that you have to fulfill. And so the head of recruitment might look for a mobile right back that's plus 6 foot. And suddenly you're in the market and you find some attractive number 10s, some exciting left full back, some exciting center backs, but you can't do a whole pile with the recruitment or the talent identification that you found because the club's only specifically looking for an agile right back. So it become a little bit frustrating that you would identify other players, but there wasn't a whole pile you could do because you were driven specifically by target positions. So I found that a little bit frustrating, and I thought that players got away. That we might have identified a really good left winger, but at the time we had a left winger in situ that the first team coach liked, so there was literally nothing that could be done. So I think you got to put a square peg in a square hole from a club scouting perspective, and so that leads to a little bit of frustration. So I think moving into the agency world, talent identification from the agency world doesn't have to be position specific. So that gives me a little bit more of a license to go, well, hey, there's a really good number 9, or there's a really good right back, or there's a goalkeeper who's got great physical presence and fantastic distribution, and you get this little bit more of a free Roman role to go out there and recruit within reason, shall we say?
Yeah. So then I take us back to what you were just mentioning about you're watching these games and you see someone that kind of sparks your interest, and maybe talk to me about that process of, is it you've seen them once, there's a spark there, and the conversation should happen right then, or do you need to watch them a number of times, or maybe walk me through that process?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I think I've taught my naked eye a lot. I think you get an instant attraction to a player. If you find a 6'4", 6'5" mobile number 9 who's strong and physical, and you're looking for first touch, you're looking for hold up play, you're looking for how he conducts himself out of possession, you're looking for ability inside the box in terms of clinical finishing. There isn't a whole pile of number 9s in the world, and if you see something that you really, really like, then you got to back your instinct. I think particularly in the agency world now, it's become, Brendan, very competitive, a lot more competitive than previous years. And so if you give yourself a license to go, I've identified a player, but I'm going to wait 6 or 7 months to see that player progress. I want to see how he adapts to a first team environment. I want to see how he adapts to MLS Next Pro, or see how he adapts in USL Championship or A-League in Australia. Then you give another agent 6 or 7 months to get in there ahead of you, and suddenly you've lost the player. So I think there's some sort of trust. You got to trust your naked eye that you're watching a game, and you really trust that instinct. But in terms of talent identification, sometimes it's been 6 or 7 or 8 games, and then sometimes it's been 1 or 2 games, and it's just been like, you got to believe in love at first sight, Brendan.
Yeah. I understand. I think there's something to be said, kind of just in football on the whole, whether you're a player, whether you're an agent, whether you're a coach, like there's something definitely to be said, I think, for moving quickly and trusting your gut and making a decision. As often I've spoken with players on here many a time, and they'll speak about, from 1 week to the next, you may all of a sudden receive a call from a coach or an agent and say, hey, can you be here, in 3 days? And are you ready to train? Are you ready to trial? And that's sort of the nature of the business. And so it doesn't surprise me at all to kind of hear there may be a similar sort of identity when it comes to an agent and seeing, hey, I think this is a player that can be special. So there's no point in drawing this out. Let's sort of make the move happen right away. What does that conversation happen? Like, what does it look like when you go and reach out to that player? Do you already sort of put together in your mind, hey, this is what I think this player might be capable of, and then sort of pitch that to them? Or is it just about building a relationship?
I think the background work has to be done before you go and sort of connect with that player, as in terms of references as well. So I'm a little bit of a stiffler in terms of the characters and personalities we look to recruit to the agency. So, if we have a player within the dressing room, or, we know a coach there, or maybe a previous coach, or, family member of a friend or something, I'll pick up the phone and say, hey, what sort of guy is he? And, what's his personality like in terms of work ethic, professionalism? How does he conduct himself day to day on and off the field? So I'm doing a lot of the background checks, Brendan, before I make that initial phone call or that initial Zoom call with the player. And
Mm-hmm.
9 times out of 10, I would probably say I know more about the player than the player knows about himself. You want to go in there as well versed as you possibly can. And then you're going into pitch, you're going in to have that conversation and how you can stand out in terms of what this company's achieved in terms of longevity, consistency in the market, contacts and professionalism and so forth. So yeah, I think you want to have as much background done as you possibly can. You want to watch as much film, because sometimes you get a question from a player where it's like, I don't know, have you saw me before? Because you want to be able to answer that question pretty firmly, that, hey, I saw you 6, 7, 8 times, or I attended this game, or I attended that game, I picked up the phone to this person, or I spoke to this person, they've given you a glowing reference. So I think the more information you could give a player in terms of the work you've put in, I'd like to think that should show the player that you're ready to go to battle for that player, or go into bat for that player, shall we say?
Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely.
I think you bring up an interesting point as well in terms of the player side of that conversation. What would you sort of, maybe two sides to this? One, what sort of questions are players asking you in your conversations with them? Or maybe two, what would you advise, whether it's with your own agency or other agents out there, what should players be asking before they decide to come on board with an agent or an agency?
I think players nowadays probably don't ask enough questions in the agency to player meeting. I often find myself asking the questions for the players, and I have no problem doing that. So I try and put myself in their shoes. Like, what do I like about you as a person, as a player? Why do I feel you could play at the next level? What the short and long term plans are in terms of on and off the field. Tell me a little bit about yourself in terms of what you do for fun. And 9 times out of 10, I think the agent, well, from a personal perspective, anywho, I find myself asking the questions for the player, And so I think I think you're right. There is a misconception about the agency industry. There is a lack of product knowledge of the agency industry from the player and the parent's perspective. And just hopefully we can just continue to educate the player. Whether the player goes with our agency or not, our job is to try and educate the player as best possible. Just try and offer them, if they take a nugget or two from a Zoom call with us, whether they've chosen us or not, I'm happy that I've done my work.
Yeah. Is there anything that you see, any commonalities or common threads between when you're speaking to players or parents, that they really are maybe misinformed or don't understand something about the professional game or the transition from college to the professional game?
I think people think short term. I think parents and players are, I'm not going to throw everybody in the same bracket here, but generalization. I think there's a very, very much a short term think, and there's, for the professional game, there's not a long term think. And so I think the agency, well, our agency, anywho, can offer a helicopter approach where you're looking down over a player's career over 15 years and so forth, and you can try and plan out, the 10 or 15 years, and sort of pathways and so forth they can take. Where I think if it's a first year pro coming from college into the pro game, if it's a player coming from NPL into A League, if it's a League of Ireland or under 21s Premier League player moving into a first team environment, these are all similar stages of that player's career, right? And so I think the player and the parent needs to think more long term, not short term in terms of the contract, the money, the lifestyle, the coach, the facilities. I think you got to think long term. And so I have a little saying, Brendan, I use all the time, and it's the day we plant the seed isn't the day we eat the fruit. And
Mm.
the day we plant the seed isn't the day we eat the fruit. And so the player and the parents and the coaching staff and the heads of recruitments and the agents need to understand that it's not going to be overnight success, And so when the player moves from the college system into the pro game, whether that's MLS Next Pro, whether that's USL, there's going to be growing pains. And so we have to, as an agency, prepare for those growing pains. And it's our job to try and make that process and transition into the full-time environment just as seamless and smooth as possible for the player and the parents, and you got to think long-term, because the average age in the Premier League, and I could be wrong in this, the average age in the Premier League is 26, 27, 27 and a half. So when the player comes out of a Pac-12 or a Big Ten or an ACC program, he comes out at 21, 22, 23, he's got 3, 4, 5 years until he reaches his peak. And so it's going to take some time for that player to learn on the job. And so, yeah, I think the biggest topic of conversation is to move away from a short-term approach and to move into a long-term approach. And that's probably where good representation comes in, where the agent needs to think long-term for the player, in terms of why we're choosing this club over another club, options-wise.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to me in the sense that you want to kind of look at yourself as an asset, because that's, sort of what you become, right, in the professional athletics world, and how can you build your value. And of course, as with any company, it's not going to be at its highest value as soon as it goes public, right? It's sort of how do you build that over time. The only thing I question, though, and I wonder, because of the nature of just sport and the nature of football, is there a little bit of truth to some athletes maybe looking at it as more of a short-term mindset? And when I ask that is because, I think the average, on the whole, the average career span of a lot of professional footballers is, 2 to 3 years. And that's because of so many different factors, right? There's injuries, they're out of contracts, they're out of form, a million different things. And so I think certainly no player can step into the professional game and earn a big contract right away. That usually has to take time. But I wonder if part of it is because of that fear of thinking, well, what happens if 3 years down the road I have a career-ending injury and I was playing the long game, and now all of a sudden, my career is in a very different spot and I have to transition in a time I wasn't ready for.
Sure.
I don't know if the athletes you're speaking to are having that kind of mindset, but it does make me think, because unfortunately, the Ronaldos and the Messis of the world who play into their late 30s, those are more of the anomaly than the rule,
Yeah, no, it's true. I think wherever you go, you have to play. I think minutes for players that are 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. That's there's a lot of turbulence in their career at that age. And so to sort of smooth that transition out, minutes are a young player's currency. Minutes are a young player's currency. And so you probably won't see it in your bank balance, but you'll see it in terms of minutes. And so for example, we had a young centre back called Jake O'Brien. He went to Crystal Palace, played for the U21s. He was the captain of the 21s team. He went on loan and he got a lot of minutes at Swindon Town. Then he went on loan to Belgium and he got a lot of minutes at Molenbeek, and he got them promoted into the top division in Belgium. And now he's at Lyon and he's playing regular minutes. And I think the more minutes you can play, you're in the shop window. And essentially, if you can play minutes, and if that's coming out of a college program and getting minutes in USL League One, if that's coming out of a college program and getting minutes in the MLS Next Pro, this is your currency. And I think short term, the currency is minutes. And so that's absolutely key. And when the player reaches a contract that there's no turning back, you sort of mentioned that there, Brendan, where there's a little bit of a case of I'm a professional soccer player or a professional football player. I've just signed my first pro contract, but you haven't reached the no turning back contract. And the no turning back contract is where, like you said, the player's mind should be at ease that this is going to be his full-time job and this is going to be his lifestyle for the next 15 years. And so until the player reaches that no going back contract, to get to that contract, minutes are going to be huge. And if the player doesn't amass those minutes, whether it's first team minutes, U21s minutes, next pro minutes, A-League minutes, there's going to be turbulence, and it's going to need proper representation to get to that no turning back contract. So I think you're right. There's about 120 paychecks in your career, in your football career, God willing. And so that should be, your aspirations should be to build your house on your career and live mortgage free. And that's sort of what I would always recommend to players. But like you said, short term, there's going to be sacrifices that are sought for minutes, and then long term, until you reach that no going back contract, you're right. Suddenly you could be out of the game within 2 or 3 years, and there's definitely a fear factor there. It's just about trying to put that player's mind at ease and offering a proper service as best you can.
Yeah. I really like that idea of the no turn back contract. That is, and I think it also highlights something interesting, which I'm sure you can speak to much better than me, of those early contracts, especially for players in the United States. Because I heard you mention something as well, that the no turn back contract is kind of like, all right, now I'm able to do this completely full time and I'm able to live sort of comfortably. But I think prior to that, a lot of people would be, I don't know if shocked to know, but certainly should be aware of, especially if they're looking to get into professional football, that those first couple contracts might not really be a full-time income. It may be just about there or a little bit under, and you may have to do a couple of other things to really make it a comfortable living. Is that sort of what you see from those college players that are coming out and getting those first contracts in MLS Next Pro or USL?
I think that's huge. I think that's huge. And unfortunately, for a lot of those players who are coming out as first year pros from college, is now thankfully enough from a quorum perspective, Brendan, we don't have any of those players, but all ours are great guys. They're very humble, fantastic to work with. But there's certainly guys coming out of the college system who think, I've made it. And I think there's a misconception there from the player that I've been drafted by ex MLS team, and that's it. I'm going to have a 15-year career in the game, and that's not really how it works. And unfortunately, whether it's an injury or an opinion or a change of coach or maybe a lack of form or self-belief, whatever it might be, whatever the recipe might be, suddenly within 2-3 seasons, the player can be using their degree, and I've no problem with the player using the degree. In fact, Brendan, one of the upsides of the college system is the player has a degree to come out with. And so, like you said, if he doesn't reach that no turning back contract, then at least he has a degree out of a top university. Where on the catch side of that, in the European market, the European academies, the guys aren't coming out with any education. For example, if you're coming through a 21s Premier League academy, or you're coming through the U20 system in Ireland, it's not really pushed to go and get a degree. And so one of the things I do like about the college system in America is that the players do have something, shall we say, a plan B, where the guys coming out of the U21 system, it might have limited education, which and it's almost frowned upon. I would arguably stereotype it here and say it's seen as a distraction to the player to be pursuing an education while trying to play full-time professional football. So, and that may be just a stereotype from the industry, but yeah, that's why I like the college system so much. I also feel that the players coming out of college are quite rounded. They're coming out at a later stage. They've gotten their degrees. They've had to sacrifice moving away from home to live on site accommodation or campus, and so they come out quite mature and quite rounded, and that's why I've spent the last couple of months in the college market.
Yeah, I think it sort of creates a whole different connotation to that no turn back contract when you look at the difference between Europe and America, right? Because like you speak of it, there is the no turn back really means for those Europeans a lot of times that if the football career does come to an end, it's going to be a very abrupt halt and we're going to have to figure out something completely new, whereas you said a lot of these student athletes in America that choose to go and pursue the professional game. I mean, I remember even speaking with coaches and this was years ago, like in the Philadelphia area, and some of these players were kind of talking about, well, this is what an MLS contract is going to be, and I now have, I think it was maybe from University of Penn, right, or Villanova, and I have this degree or I have this graduate degree, and this is what my first job out of college's salary would be that they would offer me. And a lot, especially in the early, MLS is a very new and young league. So a lot of times players would look at that and say, well, I don't know, that I'm actually going to go make more money if I just go and get a normal job than if I would be a professional athlete. And so it's an interesting, again, I go back to this. I like this idea that we're speaking about here of the kind of the no turn back contract. And it's very different. A lot of people look down upon the college soccer system, but there's a lot of benefits, as you mentioned, to it as well, which I'm sure you're seeing.
Oh, for sure. We had 2 first-round picks this year in Jackson Lead LAFC and Jaden Da from Duquesne to Columbus Crew, and they come out really well-rounded, great guys, and ready to go to work, But the good thing is they've got an education behind them as well, and they know what sacrifice looks like, and they know what it looks like to roll up the sleeves and have to go to work and work hard for those contracts. So yeah, it's true. But I think the American market, just to finish up on that one, I think I can see the flip side. They're coming out a little bit later, and so I appreciate the MLS teams have less time to work with the player. Where the English and European academies, the Italian academies, and so on have them in from a super early age. And so, look, I understand that the MLS academies seem to be moving towards more of a European role, bringing them in earlier. Seems to be less focus on the NCAA market, but there'll always be diamonds in the rough in the college market. It's just the way it is. It's just about going out there and finding them.
Yeah. And so for those couple of players that you mentioned there that sign with you and they go and get drafted, what is your relationship like with them as they go into this next phase? For more or less, is it now kind of up to them to go in and prove themselves in preseason and earn that contract? Or are you still, an integral part in talking to the club and trying to facilitate that signing to get done?
I think communication is key, Brendan, in the agency world, and communication is probably the one issue as to why a player would leave his agency because of the lack of communication. I think that's the biggest factor I've seen in the agency industry, is that just a lack of communication. So communicating with the guys through this process is going to be huge, whether that's having a conversation in terms of how they're finding the step up in professionalism, the step up in intensity, how they're adapting to a new environment, how they're finding new voices and new coaches with new ideas in the dressing room, senior players and taking information off experienced professionals is key, and so forth. So really from the agency perspective, I always say, and I believe, Brendan, that the player's job is to go out there and perform on the pitch. Is to have the 9 out of 10 performances, to be the man of the match, is to score goals, keep clean sheets, and take care of business. But you need to have a team behind you that you trust is going to take care of business off the field, whether that's a contract situation, whether that's a sponsorship situation, whether that's a highlights reel, a player profile, career-ending insurance, whatever that might look like. Moving into an apartment, just helping them, settle down and so forth, or maybe for our UK and Irish clients, whether it's going for a bite to eat, grabbing a coffee in person and so forth, hugely key just to try and help them settle in. But as I said, if the player takes care of business on the field, they need to have a team taking care of business off the field that they trust,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because, and I guess maybe this would be something I'd be curious to ask you as well, is what types of players, I guess, is there a level of player sort of that can do more of this for themselves, or maybe kind of requires to do more of this off the field stuff for themselves. And the reason I ask is because, the reality being that agents kind of work off of the success of their players. And so if you're a player who's not really highly marketable right now, maybe you're kind of an undiscovered player, you haven't really gotten your chance yet, is it something that you should be seeking to kind of go out and seek the help of an agent? Or is there part of this that a player can sort of do on their own? I guess where's the different, or where does it tip the scales for you in terms of, all right, I think this player should really have an agent in their corner versus this may be a player who can do some of it on his own?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, Brendan. I think it really just depends where the level the player is at. Let's take an NCAA player coming out of college, or an under 21s player from the English Premier League coming out, into the Championship or League One, League Two. It really is about banging a drum, and I have a little saying, shouting from the rooftops, and
Mm,
you hit the nail on the head there where you said, having somebody in their corner, you know, having somebody in your corner to speak to the right people, to speak to the decision makers, whether that's heads of player personnel, recruitment, video analysis, first team scouts, emerging talent, etc. And just having that person in their corner banging the drum is absolutely huge. So yes, I think having a team behind you to go out there and pick up the phone, make the phone calls, send the emails, organize the Zoom calls, and very,
mm,
very important. Huge. Brendan, if a player is to wait and sit around and wait for the phone to ring and for a
mm.
club to phone them, they'd be
You're
waiting a
waiting
super
for a
long
very
time,
long time.
very long time. I would arguably say 90% of the time, Brendan, it's the agent contacting the club, or the agent contacting the scout, or the scout contacting the agent. On rare occasions, is it the club scouting and talent identifying the player and headhunting the player to go in there, on rare occasions. So yes, I think having somebody in your corner to make the phone calls and stuff is and so forth is huge.
Yeah.
Huge. Big part.
Yeah, and you mentioned that idea of sort of banging the drum for the player, right? And being that advocate on their behalf. So, for example, we look at maybe a player who isn't in the quite same situation as some of those guys who got drafted, right? Because I think, and for those maybe who are listening who are a bit unfamiliar with the system in the United States, for those athletes that go and graduate college, and choose to go and play at the professional level, they can be drafted by the teams in the MLS, very similar to the way we have it set up in our other sports here in the NFL and the NBA. But uh, and this is something you can probably speak to as well. And we've already kind of mentioned here that when those players get drafted by the MLS teams, it's not necessarily a guaranteed contract. They still have to go in and prove it, and oftentimes earn that contract. What about also then the players who maybe aren't lucky enough to be drafted, and then sort of they're ready to go into the professional world, but there's, what do I do next, right? When you say
Yeah.
beating that drum for them, what does that look like? And are you just getting on the phone with previous connections, or are you kind of doing your due diligence and trying to blast it out in terms of a marketing campaign to get this player noticed and seen?
One cap doesn't fit all, right? One cap does not fit all sizes, and so the pathway is so different, for each and every player. That's both in the States, coming out of college, the European market, etc. Every pathway is different, and Austin Wayner is a player who just got announced by Tormenta today in South Georgia, USL League One. Wasn't drafted, had an incredible season at Sacramento State University. Great explosiveness, great power, great pace, great physicality. 6'1", versatile anywhere on the front three. And he signed for Tormenta after an incredible preseason. And he went undrafted. He could have equally as good as a career as somebody who was drafted.
Mm,
One path doesn't fit all. But I think if the player is willing to roll up the sleeves and put the hard yards in, I think that's the difference. I think the difference is the player making the sacrifice. And I'm a firm believer of you create your own luck. You know, Brendan, you
Mm.
create your own luck. And so players who go undrafted create their own luck by going in to preseason training stints on trial, showing up at combines, doing well in scrimmage games, um, and catching the eye. And so you create your own luck to some extent. And it's just trying to get in the building. I think just trying to get in the building is half the battle. And when you're in the building, it's on you to go in, do your extras, do your 5 kilometer runs, eat the right food, not play PlayStation till 4 a.m. in the morning. It's
Yep.
your job to be professional. Now, sometimes it's on the agent to offer proper helping hand too. Like for example, if you were driving a racing car and I told you that there was a speed van 100 yards down the road, you'd probably slow down the racing car. And sometimes just giving that player the heads up, giving that player the understanding as to what's around the corner and trying to preempt things with the player is huge, particularly in their first couple of seasons as a pro. So just to go back to that, Brendan, that point of players going undrafted, you know, equally they create their own luck and could go on to have even better careers than players who are drafted. It's such an opinions game. This world of football is such an opinions game.
Yeah.
One man's trash is another man's treasure, and this couldn't be more true in the world of football.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that sort of when you mentioned, one of your players just signing today for Tormenta in USL One? Is that sort of the buzz that you get sort of off of this job and this position, like kind of seeing the players that you've cultivated these relationships with and seeing them have that success? I'm sure I have to imagine that the first contract for players too is also a really rewarding experience for them and for you.
It's incredible. The buzz you get from identifying a player, working to bring him to the agency, bringing him a part of the family, because I really want to build a community ethos around our agency. That we're all in this together and that we're a team. We've got an excellent player pool there. We're not one of the bigger corporate agencies. We'll never be one of the bigger corporate agencies. We're not interested in playing the numbers game. I think the emphasis on quality over quantity is why I spend those hours and hours on Y Scout, why I spend those hours and hours on ESPN Plus, hours and hours on League of Ireland TV or watching the A League on Paramount Plus, is because you're trying to bring the right players to the company.
Yeah.
The satisfaction is incredible when you see a player sign his first contract, make his first team debut, score his first goal, keep his first clean sheet, sign his first autograph. That gets me up out of bed in the morning, Brendan. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning, is the excitement and the buzz when you see a player thrive. Because you've seen the player struggle. I've equally seen all our players go through struggles, and so when you see them come out the other end of the tunnel, and I think the difficult thing with a lot of young players coming through those delicate stages in their career is they're, metaphorically speaking, they're in a tunnel and they can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And they're just continuing to burrow their way through this tunnel, whether that's in training sessions, gym sessions, being that ultimate professional. And they don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And then when they do begin to see that light at the end of the tunnel, yeah, the satisfaction's great and so forth, because you've seen the struggles that you've gone through with those players who are really just part of my extended family, really, at this stage.
Yeah. Yeah, because you spoke about it before as well, kind of helping players to see what's around the corner and maybe sort of preemptively help them a little bit. I think that has to probably come into play, whether it be the positives or the negatives, because as we mentioned here, like football is such a roller coaster of emotions, and so I'm sure there's definitely a part of your job where it's like relishing in that success and living in that moment with that player when they sign that contract, but also kind of with the understanding of, all right, the work is just beginning now, and now it's time for us to really roll up our sleeves and see what we can do in this season and beyond, because there are going to be difficult times. There are going to be struggles for every player. No player's career is perfect without its fair share of adversity. So I think the agent and player relationship, when done in a way in which it sounds like you're describing, I think is really powerful to be able to have, a player have someone like that in their corner.
I think there's too many agents there for the good times. And, Brendan, it's far too easy to be there for the good times. It's too easy to be there for the first team debut. It's too easy to be there for the international debut when they put on the national jersey. That's, everybody wants to be there for those moments. But, it's being there with the ACLs. It's being there with the cruciates. It's being there when they're dropped to the bench. It's picking up a phone call when they need a vent, when they need a vent and you get something off their chest, it's being there through, you mentioned the word adversity. It's a career with bends. It is a road with bends. There's a lot of bends in the world of football. And it isn't a 9 to 5. It isn't a 9 to 5 p.m. You clock in, you clock out, you've got no worries, and you can go home at 5 p.m. And do it all again tomorrow. Unfortunately, this is a 24/7 industry now, and particularly for our company, working and doing deals in America, doing deals in the European market now, doing deals in the Australian market. It's 24/7. It's an absolute 24/7. The football never stops. You could be watching an A-League game in the evening. It's morning time in Europe. The Australians go to sleep. The Europeans wake up, and you're watching a game in France, or you're watching a game in Belgium. And then the Europeans go to bed, and then I'm watching a game in an MLS Next Pro or an NCAA game. So It's a 24/7 industry. You just got to be alert. But it's certainly a road with bends, that's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And too, if we even dig a little bit deeper on this kind of adversity, spot here, how do you, when you're navigating this journey with players, right? What is the process like when a player is dealing with adversity? And I ask it from the perspective of, I think there are times when it does make sense for a player to stick it out through, the adversity and maybe push for another contract with this club or push just to rectify the situation that they're currently a part of. But, again, sometimes we see at the highest levels of professional football when players aren't really having things their way, they're not playing or they're not enjoying the coaching style or what have you. Sometimes they sort of throw their toys out of the pram a little bit, and maybe it's they go and try and get a coach fired, or they try and, have a contract ripped up so they can go somewhere else. And a lot of that, I'm sure, has to come down to what the agent decides to do and how they advise that player in terms of the next step. So where do you sort of toe the line? I'm sure it's a case-by-case basis, but where do you toe the line on saying, hey, this is time for us to dig deep and roll up our sleeves, or, you know what, it might be time for us to move elsewhere?
Yeah, it's a stick or twist situation, isn't it? We've had a couple of those situations over the last couple of years, and we're going to have more in the future. And it's really about sitting down with the player and his family as well, and having a conversation and going, do we need to go out there and secure a loan move, or do we need to go out there on a permanent and leave on a permanent transfer, or should we stick it out? Should we roll up the sleeves? Should we get to work? Should we bring a smile to training? Should we be the first in and the last out of the training ground? Yep. Should we give the coaching staff and the management staff no excuses to why we've been dropped, or why we shouldn't be in the starting 11, or why we aren't making match day squads? And so you're right, it's a hugely unique situation. It's a case by case basis. It's definitely requires a couple of sit downs, whether it's a coffee or a Zoom call with the player and the family, and we talk about the pros and the cons, and if the player, ultimately the player will make the final decision. If the player feels that it's time to twist, then we've got to go out there and look for options, and we've got to get some options on the table. But until those options are on the table, then we have to continue to go to work every day and enjoy that working environment. But you're right. there's definitely that sort of fight or flight situation at times where you're going to work hard and fight for your place, or it's ready to go and get on a flight and take a new journey. And we've had situations where players have decided to stay on, and things happen very quickly. It could be a managerial change, or it could be a run of bad form, and suddenly the player's back in the team, or they've got to change a manager, and a new manager comes in and sees a twinkle in the eye of the player that the previous manager didn't see. And so it's a hugely case by case basis, and it's definitely talked about months in advance of the transfer window as to whether that player is going to require a loan or a permanent, but minutes are key, and again, just going back to that topic of conversation with those players who are coming through the infancies of their career, we need them to be playing, and if that's going out on loan and playing and coming back in the following window, I have no problem with that either,
Yeah.
Once they're happy.
Yeah. And just out of my own curiosity here, when you mentioned this idea of the transfer window and sort of deadline day and just the transfer window as a whole, right? I'm just so curious about this because I think what's been so fascinating over the past couple of years is there's been so many different shows that have come out that have sort of documented teams' whole seasons, right? You think of the likes of Bayern and Man City and Juventus and Sunderland a few years back, and you get this in-depth all access pass sort of to the behind the scenes of these football clubs, which for those of us who love football is really fascinating. And they always have this sort of, whether it's an episode or just part of the season arc where it's the transfer window and it's deadline day, and you feel like they're still making calls all the way up until 11:59 when the deadline is in a minute. And I have to ask, as someone who is an agent, is it really like that, one? Or, I mean, do you have any stories of sort of what the transfer window looks like for you, and maybe even what deadline day looks like?
I think the summer window in particularly, we'll take the summer window. The summer transfer window in the European market is a 3-month window. And so there's a lot of planning and preparation, both from the agency perspective and from the club perspective too. I think a lot of clubs go out there with a sheet, a target sheet of who they want to target and who they want to bring to the team, right? Whose contracts are expiring, who's surplus to requirements, and who they feel will be the right perfect fit for the organization. And so I think the summer window in Europe, it's a long window, it's 3 months. And there's a lot of preparation and a lot of sit downs with players in terms of, are we ready for a new chapter? Do we need a new start, or would we sign a new contract, etc., etc. So I think the summer window is a window, particularly in the European market, that I enjoy because the January window in the European market is a little bit of a fixer-upper window, where it's a window of a team's in a relegation zone. A team has a player that has just done an ACL or a cruciate. He's now out with a long-term injury, and they didn't budget for that financially. And so I think there's a lot of short-term thinking on the January transfer window in Europe, because 75% of European countries run that sort of 1 month January window. And so it can be a little bit more chaotic. I think the summer window is super well planned out in Europe. I think the January window hasn't been as busy for clubs in recent seasons. And then flip that. Obviously in the American market, the January window is a long window. It's the whole winter period, and there's a lot of preparation as to who they want to bring into pre-season, who they want to invite into scrimmage games, and who they want to sit down and have interviews with. So I think right now there's a lot of planning and preparation on the American window because they're in pre-season, and we just came out of the January window, which was slightly chaotic in Europe, and we got everybody landed, which was most important, safely.
Were there any kind of close calls when it comes to that, or even in your career as a whole, whether it be the American window or the European window, where it really did come down to the wire in terms of getting everything over the line?
Yes, it's an interesting question. We've had one or two deadline days as a whole. where it's come down to the wire. They've all gotten across the line, thankfully enough, in terms of we haven't had any administration issues or any missing documents or anything like that. We dotted our I's and we crossed our T's, Brendan. So thankfully enough, we haven't had any of those stories just yet. But look, we've seen online, obviously, in terms of an issue with a printer or an issue with a fax machine or so on
Yep.
in recent windows. But thankfully, we haven't been involved in any of those ones, which is good. Trying to get the business done early is a good option when it's the right fit. If you can, as the Roy Keane said, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. So if we can prepare super well for the summer window in Europe, then we can get the business done early. And if there's one or two late deals to get done, the company will have a lot of time so that we can offer those proper hands-on services. But certainly from a time perspective and a hands-on perspective, we haven't had any mishaps, and don't foresee any of them either in the future.
Yeah.
Sure.
Now, when you have an early and an organized approach to it, I can definitely see that. And so with this relationship, right? It sounds to me as I'm listening to you speak, so much of it is player centric and player focused. And I think it's been something interesting for me to learn over my years is sort of the difference between the way in which some agents operate, where some are some kind of partner with maybe a handful of clubs and they really build these relationships with clubs. And then they almost sort of work on behalf of the club more so than necessarily the player. Kind of maybe even similar to like the scouting role you were in, right? Where it's a bit more of like, okay, what's the ask? Is it a square peg? All right, let me go find a square peg. Whereas you're more so of kind of, it sounds to me, I represent the player and let me try and go facilitate what's best for the player. And am I categorizing that correctly? Or I guess maybe what's your relationship really with clubs? Because I'm sure you have to establish relationships with them, but you want to make sure you're doing kind of what's best for that player you represent.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, Brendan. If I think about this before as well, look, I think if you've got a player that the club is interested in, they want to get the deal done. Let's be honest. If you have something that I want, I'm coming to you to get it. And it's kind of like the old bartering days, way, way back in the olden age, where, if you have something that I want, I'm going to barter for that and we're going to trade and get this done. So I think from an agency perspective, if we have something that the club wants, they're going to be all over it to have it, and it's as simple as that. Sometimes whether that's about, getting a deal done early or bringing a player in to train or organizing a trial period or something like that, So I think building up good relationship with clubs is key though as well. Your two C's are your contacts and your contracts, and you need to be able to have good contacts and how you manage those relationships, because not every deal goes through. Maybe a player has a toss-up decision on 2 or 3 options, and you've got to let 2 or 3 options down. So I'm happy to take the bullets for the players. I'm happy to take the bullets for the guys, in terms of if they go with a different club. But it's how you manage those expectations and how you manage those bullets as well. And I think just that level of professionalism is key. Look, you need to know where the sweet spot is. I think when you're going in and having an honest conversation with a club, and by the way, Brendan, a lot of this is now done over telephone, and a lot of contracts are done as well through emails and so forth. I would say a lot of the business is done before you get into the building. And when you're in the building, it's just about signing off on the contract and just making sure everything looks perfect, where I would say 90% of the deal is done before the player even arrives in to sign his contract nowadays. So it's moved towards that industry. But yeah, I think it's how you manage the contacts and building those relationships. Networking is huge, right? Networking is huge. And just being able to network with clubs is massive. I think that's one thing we've done very, very well as an agency now. We've guys playing in the Swedish Premier Division, guys playing in Belgium, guys playing in France, guys playing in Scotland and England, America, in Ireland, in Australia. So the company's been able to network really well. We all speak the one language, and we're talking the language of football. So networking and managing contacts at clubs is huge. I think the one thing that's hard to keep up with, Brendan, is the chopping and change, and there's a lot of chopping and changing in terms of the managers or the heads of recruitments or the scouts, and so
Yeah.
you've got to try and stay on top of that in terms of who's at which club at this stage.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious just your thoughts on that in general. I mean, I certainly look at it from a fan perspective sometimes, and I often wonder, like, with the way in which managers are just sort of on this carousel. Sometimes it seems, and very rarely is a manager given the time to make mistakes and then kind of try and rectify them. And I don't know, maybe you can speak to this as well. Maybe the same is true for a player in terms of maybe they're only offered a short-term deal, and if you don't prove it, then off you go. I mean, it is a high performance based industry, and we are in the business of wins and losses. So it is, I don't know, as someone who's on the front lines, right? What is that really, that chop and change kind of like?
It's very results driven, isn't it? It is a hugely results driven industry, and so I think when you're transitioning in from to be a first year pro, or you're transitioning into your early stages in your career, I think the players begin to realize very quickly that it's not how you go about the win. It's about securing the win. It's about securing the clean sheet. It's about securing the 3 points, and so I think there's a huge emphasis now, particularly with the chopping and changing of managers and so forth in around the world, so I think it's very results driven, and it's just about helping the player through that as well, whether that's just managing expectations or doing a little bit of video analysis. I'm a bit of a stiffler when it comes to watching the games. I love to watch all our guys at our agency. I try and watch all the games from the weekend. I sit down, we'll go through the games together, we'll have a little talk about what we did well and where we can improve. I try and make sure that our players don't make the same mistake twice. And so, if you could just add that little snippet of information, that really helps as well. So, yeah, hugely performance driven industry, and but so rewarding, Brendan. So rewarding,
Yeah.
so satisfying. From a life experience perspective, from a player perspective, and a manager perspective, so financially rewarding as well. To play in front of 30, 40, 50,000 fans, incredible experiences, and to get on a plane and play Europa League, Champions League, or MLS, or whatever it might be. It's domestically, it's such a rewarding career, and it's probably one of the only careers in the world where you get all the money at the start of your career, and then that's got to last you for the rest of your life, your lifespan. So
Yep.
I think in terms of having proper representation, in terms of advice, life after football as well, massive as well, because you gotta want to have proper representation that, we're not the company that's going to be out of these nightclubs or out partying with these guys. When it comes to getting business done, working hard and being professional, that's the type of agency we are in terms of building good relationships with the guys, and putting a team around them so that they can be successful and maximize their potential, which is key.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that summarizes it in a great way, and the way in which we've talked about it today as well, how rewarding, and like we said, that kind of buzz that you get off of these players' success has to be very fulfilling when it comes to your career. I really like to do something kind of towards the end of most of my podcasts where, because I love the idea of story. When it comes to a player's career, a coach's journey, anyone that I really have on the show here. And so if we talk about kind of your career, and this can be personally, professionally, you can kind of take the question how you want to. If we look at sort of this chapter that you're in right now, how would you sort of describe it to someone when it comes to the agency world, or anywhere you want to take it?
Wow, this chapter I'm in right now, well, it's like a pinch myself moment at the moment, Brendan. To be honest, because when the teacher in class used to put up the hand and say, what did you want to be when you were older? I would say I wanted to be a FIFA licensed football agent, and so I'm sort of in a chapter in my life now where it's like, wow, I look back at that 10, 12, 13, 14-year-old me, who never played professionally, didn't play the game, just played, local grassroots, non-league soccer. And I look back now and I'm like, wow, what's the next 10 years going to bring? And if I just continue to put the hard work in, continue to grind, um, and put the hours in, we're going to be there to support the guys and the rest of the guys, the company. And I'm excited. It's still only 27 now, so I've still got the baby face. So somebody's got to bring the youth and enthusiasm. So that's what I bring. And I think this chapter of my career now is, yeah, it's a case of reflection in terms of when I was younger. I always wanted to do this, but it's also about really taking things seriously, working hard, and yeah, getting down to business in terms of networking, tape, video calls, Zoom calls, and just trying to really carve out the next 10 years in terms of what they're going to look like for us. I just want to keep building this company, keep building the agency, and we don't want to be the biggest company in terms of numbers, but I definitely want to have all our guys in terms of happy with what service we provide. I think just right now in this chapter of my career, I'm just trying to give the guys the best professional service that they can be given.
Yeah. You spoke to it a little bit there when you maybe even speak about the next 10 years, right? Is there anything specific that you can kind of point to that you want to make sure is written in some of the upcoming chapters, over maybe that span of that 10 years?
Wow. Probably sleep, Brendan. There's a misconception that I don't sleep, and I do. I don't sleep very much. Only a couple of hours a night, maybe 3 or 4 hours will do me. But with the industry we're in at the moment and so on, it's hard to get some sleep. So I think in the next 10 years, I want to be better with managing sleep. I think because it isn't set hours. There aren't set hours. So probably one of the things I've found more difficult to do is to switch off. Because I feel like I'm always on the clock, and I've no problem with that. I enjoy that, but yeah, probably managing that a little bit better in the next 10 years would be good. Look, if we can just continue to bring good quality players to the company and continue to retain them, and work with them and see them flourish, and it's an absolute privilege. So 10 years from now, if we can just continue to have a fantastic bunch of guys that we enjoy working with and getting up in the morning, getting out of bed, and enjoying picking up the phone or having a bite to eat, or offering a professional service with these guys, that's the plan. So more of the same in the next 10 years. God willing.
Yeah, and a little bit of that work-life balance maybe. But who knows? It may just get busier and more crazy as you go on and write more chapters.
So be it. Yeah. Well, look, there's a little bit of gray coming at the moment, but it might just be the sunlight. We'll be all right.
and so the last phase of my question is just somebody goes and they pick up the book, whether it's in a little coffee shop in Ireland or at a beach bar in Brisbane or maybe somewhere in the States. They've just read it and they've said, Cal just wrote this book, you have to read it. What do you want them to say about it?
Wow. Well, I want them to say, did you hear his first job was at McDonald's? That's what I want them. I want them to say, did you hear his first job was working at McDonald's? Because I remember working at McDonald's on the line in Macca's at the time, and just going home and being like, how much games can I watch? How much tape can I watch? How much new players can I grow? What information? What contacts can I network with? How can I get going on LinkedIn, get emails, etc. When I started this, and before Patrick Dean and Sean Shields and the guys at Quorum Sports give me a shot, I was working at McDonald's. So I think from a life experience perspective, people read the book and they're sitting in a coffee shop in Brisbane, or they're up in Manhattan reading the book, or maybe over in California. I'd like them to take one thing away from the book, and that's he started at McDonald's.
It's an incredible story, man. I mean, especially to see where you've gotten to now, and to see what the next, as we mentioned, what the next 10 years can unfold from that beginning is fascinating. Yeah, man, this has been so much fun. I appreciate you so much for taking the time, and I've learned a ton here in chatting with you. So I can't thank you enough.
I love it. Come here, Brendan. It was an absolute pleasure. Thanks for taking some time out and connecting with us today, already. Take care. Thanks for the
Excellent.
time.
That's it for this week, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much to Kalkeren for stepping in the 11 this week and sharing his insights with all of you. If you have made it this far into the episode, please, whatever platform you are listening or watching on, please make sure to go down and hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel massively grow, and I greatly, greatly appreciate it. So whether you're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you are getting this podcast right now, please make sure to subscribe so you can stay up to date on when the next episode drops. All right. Thank you so much. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.